Good evening. Welcome this evening. My name is Jolande Janssen. We are organizing this evening together with a lot of people who were organizing last year's teach-ins.
Nou, kijk maar of je computer Jan dan.
Cuba Staff for Palestine. We would like to thank the Scholars for Palestine for their help organizing the tour for Professor Gordon, and we would also like to thank OSCA for their support. We are going to listen tonight to a lecture by Professor Neve Gordon next to me, giving a lecture titled Academia in the Face of Genocide. After highlighting the destruction of higher education in Gaza, Neve Gordon will analyze the different strategies that universities in the USA, in Europe and in Israel have adopted to silence Palestinian and pro-Palestinian speech and activism, while stressing the clampdown's connection to the marketisation of the university and the rise of the extreme right-wing politics. I think we are all aware, and also very conscious at this moment of what a terrible time this is. And I would like to read starting a very long phrase from Gil Hochberg from 2016, which will require some concentration to follow. But I think she points out very well, she pointed out in 2016 already very well what the time we are in was going to bring and what it is now. And this is the quote. The fact that the so-called solution to the Jewish question in Europe, between brackets, and the problem of anti-Semitism in Europe involved settling the remaining Jews of Europe out of Europe in Palestine, which in turn created a new colonial situation in the Middle East at the very moment that Europe pulled out of, or was rather forced to pull out of, its final colonial enterprise, must be seen for what it is: Europe's way to cleanse itself from its two modern historical crimes, anti-Semitism on the one hand and colonialism on the other, by transferring their weight onto its primary historical victims. With Jews as the new and latest colonizers in a post-colonial world, and Muslims, Palestinians we could add, now accused of becoming the new anti-Semites, against which European leaders, including right-wingers such as Marine Le Pen, we can now add a whole list, must protect their Jews, Europe presents itself once again as the voice of reason, enlightenment and tolerance, a fantasy by which we must actively forget and displace the long European legacy, colonialism, racism, Islamophobia, and anti-Semitism. End of quote. It is time that Europeans, including the Netherlands and including Dutch universities, start taking the task of facing what this means very seriously. And tonight is one of our attempts to do so. This is also why we are very happy that you want to be here and give your talk. Professor Gordon has already talked in Tilburg and in Utrecht, so we are the third university that you take all the courage and energy to visit and be here. After Professor Gordon's talk, there will be 3 people reacting. One of them in the public, Adaya, who is a sociologist living in the Netherlands, Israeli background, very knowledgeable about the whole situation. So thanks, most welcome. Liana Seid, who I prepared a lot of things to tell about. Yeah, she's assistant professor of religious studies at our university. She's of Palestinian background and a scholar, and by now of the notion and of the practice of scholasticide. She is, the main focus of her work is interrogating religion as a construction in the colonial setting. And lastly, I should say she's trained as a medieval, as a scholar of medieval esotericism. So very rich. Yeah. Thirdly, Michiel Potts is going to speak. He is an associate professor of law and humanities at Tilburg University. He did his doctorate dissertation at ASCA, by the way, at the UvA, so it's nice to have you here for a moment again. Oh, master, sorry, excuse me. Together with Hans Lindahl, he organized Professor Gordon's talk at Tilburg University, so maybe you can also refer back to earlier discussion or whatever, that would be nice. I think I said everything I needed to say. Thanks and very welcome. Also the people on Zoom, there's a lot of them. So, very good that you're there.
Thank you, for inviting me. Thanks to University of Amsterdam for inviting me. I must say I feel much better here because in Utrecht they didn't really want me to talk at the university and we had to move to another outlet for the talk to take place. I'm going to talk about the attack on academic freedom and freedom of expression. But if anyone wants to ask any question during the Q&A about the legal dimension, about the attacks on hospitals, about any other issue that I don't mention, I'll be happy to answer in the Q&A. So I'm going to begin. Thank you.
Can you get it louder because it's very low?
Can you make it a bit louder here?
Let's see.
Or I can wear one of those things on.
Yeah. Yeah, also on the PowerPoint mentioned, it's just making sure.
Make sure.
Yeah. Is it better?
Okay, is this a bit better?
Yes.
Okay. In this talk, I take as my starting point the genocidal statements of Israeli leaders, the tens of thousands of Palestinians killed, and the untold number of people maimed and displaced. I take as a given the obstruction of humanitarian aid and the wholesale destruction of hospitals, schools, mosques, apartment buildings, water plants, greenhouses, and even cemeteries. My focus today is on academic freedom and freedom of expression, not specifically in Holland, but more broadly in Western academia. The question that interests me is how Western institutions of higher education have responded to the genocidal violence that has been broadcast live through mainstream and social media. Before addressing this question, I do want to highlight the attack on Palestinian higher education, where 11 out of Gaza's 19 colleges and universities have been destroyed, including 4 out of 6 major universities. Hundreds of university staff and an untold number of students have been killed, including 3 university presidents and 7 deans. I mentioned the systematic destruction of higher education in Gaza itself because as someone who has been working in this sector for over 25 years, I would have expected that when an entire sector is being wiped out in front of our eyes, leaders of Western universities would have, at the very least, sent messages of empathy to their besieged counterparts. A simple act of solidarity. Yet if you Google it, you will find that 1, perhaps 2 or 3 university presidents have published a statement condemning the systematic destruction of higher education in the Gaza Strip and the wide-scale killing of students and staff. one, maybe two or three out of several thousand university presidents in the West. Actually, however, when looking at the response of Western universities over the past year to what has been happening in Gaza, we witness a fundamental disjuncture. On the one hand, we have seen an unprecedented mobilization on the part of students and staff against the genocide and the organization of literally thousands of events, protests, and encampments. Moreover, students and staff have organized highly visible and in some cases partially successful campaigns calling for an immediate ceasefire, divestment of university portfolios from Israeli and non-Israeli war-making companies, a boycott of Israeli academic institutions, and the creations of scholarships for Palestinian students and staff. On the other hand, something is not working. On the other hand, and in response to the student and staff mobilization, we have witnessed the cancellation of events, the suspension of students and staff, the attempt to recruit students as spies, the transfer of information about the students to police, and the dismantlement, often in a violent way, of hundreds of encampments. In short, university leaders have clamped down on protests, claiming that the mobilization of resistance against Israel's actions is unsafe and jeopardizes relations on campus. Universities, of course, are not islands, and in several respects, mirror relations in many Western countries where there is a wide gap between civil society's response, which has been protesting Israel's war in Gaza, and the political elites who have, for the most part, been supporting Israel. However, insofar as universities' mission is the search for truth and preparing students to become active citizens, not only in the workplace, but also in the social and political processes that affect their lives, one might have expected university leaders to support the political engagements of their students, whether or not they agree with their stand, or at least refrain from restricting their outcry against genocide. The fact that they have intervened, and I will get to the specifics of how universities have intervened in a moment, is, I believe, in large part, the outcome of the neoliberalization of higher education, the remaking of universities as corporations. There are several seats over there if you want. Mimicking corporations, universities now consider their major objective to be the provision of products, most obviously degrees to students. The corporatization of universities also means that the staff members themselves are perceived as producers and products. Academics are expected to come up with inventions and patents that can be sold to corporations, as well as to generate research funds and produce and high citations in their research papers, which have a pseudo market value because they help elevate university rankings. Simultaneously, staff are conceived as products themselves. They are discouraged from unionizing, and their value is determined according to a corporate calculus rather than an academic intellectual one. Ultimately, the neoliberal university, as numerous scholars have claimed, center stages a rationality that not only reduces academic work to market metrics and then uses these metrics to shape the university's mode of governance, but also, as Wendy Brown has pointed out, to help shape the students and staff themselves, their interests and forms of behavior, and the way they believe academic life should be organized. Moving to and from the management of the university to the inner workings of the subject, the neoliberal university constructs and interpolates students and staff as entrepreneurs. Obviously, this process has not occurred without resistance. And this resistance has also helped expose how the corporatization of universities has altered forms of accountability. Those at the helm of universities are currently more accountable to politicians, their boards, the university's shareholders, often corporate leaders, and its customers, namely students and their parents. They're more accountable to them than to the university's original mission and the staff members who carry it out. Consequently, the remaking of universities as corporation has played a key role in the destruction of faculty governance in conjunction with the ascendancy of administrative rule, processes that have also helped engender faculty complicity with the university's corporate goals. These processes have also led to the destruction of meaningful internal governing institutions like faculty senates, while the absence of an internal academic power base undermines internal democratic checks and balances and renders the administrative leadership much more susceptible to external pressures. And indeed, over the past few months, politicians, from Federal Minister of Education Bettina Stark-Watzinger in Germany to Congresswoman Virginia Fox in the USA, have been intervening in university procedures, while in the US, we have also witnessed how donors have done the same. All of which serves as the background for the clampdown on academic freedom and freedom of expression. While I will not have time today to underscore the racist and Islamophobic dimension of the attacks on academic freedom of expression, it is important to mention that alongside the neoliberalization of universities, certain aspects of the clampdown have also been intricately tied to the historical involvement of universities in highly racialized colonial and imperial projects and state-making projects, a history that has been analyzed by numerous scholars, including in the book, The Imperial University, edited by Pia Chatterjee and Sonaiya Maya. One cannot readily understand the current clampdown without taking into account geopolitical power relations, or that the genocide is not taking place on European soil, and that many of those who resist it are non-whites. Even though I will not directly analyze the role played by racism and Islamophobia, I'll be happy to address it during the Q&A. Now let's turn to the clampdown and how it unfolded. Obviously, in different countries, actors and power relations have informed the struggle between university managers and pro-Palestinian students and staff differently. Yet on the whole, universities mobilized two major charges against events and encampments consistently in consistently invoking at least one, but often both accusations as a way of not dealing with students' demands to divest from Israel and stop cooperation with its higher education institutions. The key charges have been anti-Semitism and causing physical hazards for students and staff. Both charges, one should note, have been packaged as a security threat. Let's begin with a bake sale. The Francis Crick Institute in London is the largest facility in Europe researching biology. Among its 2,000 staff members are people committed to a range of humanitarian causes across the globe, and it is not uncommon to walk in the Crick Institute and stumble on a bake sale for homeless people in UK, for the earthquake victims in Turkey and Syria, or for orphan children in Ukraine. Several months ago, a group of Crick members, among them a good friend of mine, decided to organize a bake sale to raise money for sick and wounded Palestinians. When the bake sale came around on 13th of March, 2024, there were over 20 different kinds of cakes. There were brownies and there were lemon drizzles. And the cakes were grabbed by the people in the Crick Institute, and the organizers managed to raise over £2,000 for an organization called Medical Aid for Palestine. At the end, they thought it was a great success. Several months, but then things began to unravel. A few other Crick members filed a complaint at Human Resources, claiming the bake sale made them feel unsafe. They also suggested that UK charity Medical Aid for Palestinians is a front for channeling money for terrorists. As a result, Crick's Human Resources Department informed the organizers that future bake sales for Gaza would not be allowed, and that sharing information about human suffering in Gaza on the Crick Slack channels was in breach of the institution's code of conduct. Unfortunately, and as many people in this room know, since October 7, 2023, events like bake sales are not the only perceived threats to higher education institutions. Movie screenings, cooking workshops, literary festivals, panels, talks, and even classes have been canceled or subjected to restrictions due to risk assessments associated with safety concerns. Following the complaint filed to the Royal Geographical Society, it decided to cancel a Palestinian literary event, claiming, and I quote, "We made the decision on the basis of a risk assessment which considered the safety of our event contributors and guests, our staff and contractors, cleaning, catering, and security staff, and the site itself." After canceling an event with Avi Schlein, an emeritus fellow of St. Anthony's College in Oxford and a fellow of the British Academy. Someone did that. Who did that? I don't know, but anyway, he looks very dangerous. As the well-being and safety, the spokesperson explained, as the well-being and safety of our students and staff is a priority for the university, we believe it is more appropriate to hold this important lecture later in the year. Many witnessed similar reactions towards the encampments, which were established to protest the genocide in Gaza, but simultaneously constituted, in the words of Henry Giraud, a struggle for the commons, for public life, and if not, for democracy itself. My claim is that in their demands, the encampments also sought to democratize power and decision-making processes, and by so doing, threatened the structure of the neoliberal university, and that this too was considered a risk, just as much as the demands relating to Gaza. I would even say it probably is considered the bigger of the two risks. The encampments, as we know, spread like fire from Columbia University in New York and the University of Toronto in Canada to Queen Mary University in London, through the University of Amsterdam in Holland, and all the way to the Australian National University. In response, university administrators mobilized anti-Semitism and safety regulation to dismantle and now prohibit the return of hundreds of student encampments. To be sure, universities have an obligation to ensure the safety of all students and staff, including Jewish students and staff. Threats to safety should be dealt with in a firm and timely manner, but not unlike the fabricated threat emanating from the Crick bake sale or the hummus workshop here in Holland that was also canceled, or literally hundreds of other events. The encampment threat to safety has often been produced by the university through their own statements and actions. By framing events and encampments as threats to safety, universities, alongside several securitizing actors, such as politicians and lawmakers, donors, lobbying groups, media outlets, and NGOs, have helped generate, in the words of Stuart Hall and Donatella de la Porta, moral panic, which then helps legitimize interventions to overcome the threat. I might add that it is easier to create moral panics around issues relating to racialized and Muslim groups. In an August 9, 2024 message to students and staff at Columbia University in New York, the university's chief operating officer wrote that effective Monday, August 12th, we are adjusting campus access status to orange for all hours of the day. This change is intended to keep our community safe, given reports of potential disruptions at Columbia and on college campuses across the country as we approach the beginning of the new school year. My claim is that messages like this one, which presents the community's safety at risk, help produce a threat and moral panic that is then used to justify the imposition of restrictive regulation. Moreover, the threat to safety is produced in an effort to displace what universities think of as the real risk. In this case, active students and staff who make demands on university leaders. Let's look more closely, albeit briefly, at the key charges waged against the encampments, namely the anti-Semitism and causing physical hazards, to get a sense of the kind of work that was carried out to dismantle them. Literally hundreds of encampments were established during 2023-24 academic year, and aside from a few disturbing incidents involving anti-Semitic statements that were rapidly dealt with by the universities and indeed by the participants in the encampments themselves, the encampments were peaceful sites of learning and debate where students formulated political demands aligned not only with their own vision of social justice, but also with the decolonizing mission to which many students, particularly in the humanities and social sciences, had been exposed to in their classrooms. Israel supporters charged at the encampments, most of which had Jewish students among their ranks, were creating an unsafe environment to Jewish students and staff, and therefore needed to be dismantled. Many universities, particularly in North America, but also in Germany and elsewhere in Europe, took the accusation very seriously and mobilized it against the encampments. University administrators were receptive to the charge that the security of Jewish students and staff was threatened for several reasons. First, many universities had already adopted the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism, an issue I will discuss in depth in a moment. Second, university administrators rarely consult their own academic experts, and in this case, in this case, most universities fail to consult with their own staff who have academic expertise on anti-Semitism, racism, genocide, and Israel-Palestine. For example, I'm an expert on Israel-Palestine. My university never consulted me. Third, university leaders tend to mistakenly relate to Jewish students and staff in monolithic terms, as if they hold one view and that view is aligned with the state of Israel. Fourth, Islamophobia is alive and well, and the anti-Semitism charge feeds into the prejudicial views about Muslims in the West. To be sure, the reasoning of different university administrators was also informed by larger forces, from the geopolitical interests of Western countries and the corporate interests surrounding arms sales, to the positions expressed by their own government and the claims made by right-wing politicians who invoke the encampments to advance their own interests and ratings. Let's turn to examine the security threat arising from the charge of anti-Semitism, which in many countries, the accusation has been effective in silence pro-Palestinian speech. Notwithstanding the position of university leaders, the charge that encampments create an unsafe environment for Jews is based on two false and intricately tied conflations. One between feeling uncomfortable and being unsafe, and another between individual Jews and the state of Israel. There is little doubt that when charging Israel with genocide, apartheid, settler colonialism, racism, and the perpetration of war crimes and crimes against humanity, the encampments can make students and staff who support Israel feel uncomfortable. I do not doubt that. I'm sure that is the case. Discomfort, however, is not something universities can invoke when clamping down on speech, nor is it something they necessarily need to shy away from. After all, it has been said that universities are institutions whose mission is, inter alia, to cultivate zones of intellectual discomfort, since discomfort can be a productive force that facilitates creative thinking. Because discomfort cannot be used to file a complaint, it is displaced and replaced by the term unsafe, by the claim that critiques of Israel are in fact anti-Semitic, and insofar as they are anti-Semitic, they create an unsafe environment for Jewish students and staff. Here again, there is a convergence between the neoliberalization of universities and other forces such as geopolitical alignments and pervasive Islamophobia. The claim that criticism of Israel is based on the second false conflation, the one between the criticism of Israel's anti-Semitic is based on the second false conflation, the one between individual Jews and Israel, which many Western universities have endorsed after adopting the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. I understand that here in Holland it has not been adopted by the universities, but I think that many managers still create this conflation, and I want to explain now how I think it works. In order to understand the power of the IHRA working definition and the role it has played in university politics, we first need to draw a distinction between the traditional conception of anti-Semitism and one advanced by the IHRA definition. Traditionally, anti-Semitism was conceived as abhorrent conspiracy theories about Jewish control of the media, finance, and government, blood libel accusations, Holocaust denialism, and dehumanizing caricatures of Jews. The IHRA definition accepts this traditional conception of anti-Semitism, but also conflates anti-Semitism with any form of anti-Zionism, as well as with harsh criticism of Israel. In my writings on anti-Semitism, Zionism, and human rights, I have shown how the IHRA definition operates by encouraging an effective attachment between individual Jews and Israel, and that this tie is presented by the definition as if it emanates naturally and thus unmediated from within each individual Jew and the fact of their Jewishness. Put differently, the IHRA definition is based on a set of abstractions that can be formulated as a syllogism. Each individual Jew is part of the collective Jew. The collective Jew is equivalent to Israel. Therefore, all individual Jews are equivalent to Israel. And if all individual Jews are equivalent to Israel, then any criticism of Israel becomes a criticism of individual Jews and therefore becomes anti-Semitic. It is, however, important to note that while Israel defines itself as a Jewish state, the equation between the state and the collective Jew is based on a series of false assumptions. These include the fictitious notion that every Jew identifies with the state and its political ideology, which paradoxically can be constructed as itself anti-Semitic. An anti-Semitic construct because it reduces Jews to a singularity, operating by excluding Jews who do not identify with Israel from the collective. Moreover, the identification of all Jews with Israel is assumed even though half of the worldwide Jewish population does not live in Israel, and over 40% of those Jews say they do not feel an attachment to the country. Moreover, 20% of the country's citizens are Palestinians, and an additional 5 million stateless Palestinians live within the areas that Israel controls. Many Jews are not Zionist, and some are anti-Zionist, while simultaneously Zionism has numerous traits that do not emanate from or characteristic of Jewishness, but rather emerge from socialist, nationalist, and settler colonial ideologies of the 18th, 19th, and 20th century. Even though the abstractions produced by the IHRA definition suggest otherwise, a critique of Zionism or Israel is not necessarily a product of an animus towards Jews, while ironically perhaps hatred towards Jews does not necessarily entail an anti-Zionist or anti-Israel stance. We have a Zionist anti-Semitic running for president now in the United States, so we know that it can go together. Furthermore, the orientation of the affective attachment that the Israeli government and the IHRA definition produce between individual Jews, the collective Jews in Israel, is reinforced through the claim to Jewish difference. The notion of a group's difference is, of course, not unique to Jews. Other racial, ethnic, religious, or cultural groups consider themselves as different and as require certain legal protections. The IHRA's innovation consists not so much in laying claim to a Jewish difference and the need to protect it, but in the extension of that claim to the state of Israel. And the idea that criticism of the state amounts to an attack on the protected characteristics of individual Jews. An analogy would be me criticizing the government of Holland and you, as a person who identifies as Dutch, accusing me of uttering hate speech against you personally. The IHRA is part of a whole apparatus aimed at producing an identification between individual Jews in Israel, which then leads individual Jews to experience criticism of the state, its political ideology and political project, as if it were anti-Semitic. I, for example, teach human rights at Queen Mary University. If I teach Amnesty International's apartheid report about Israel, or Human Rights Watch apartheid report about Israel, or B'Tselem's apartheid report about Israel, a Jewish student in the classroom might experience that as being an affront against them and experience it as anti-Semitic. But this Jewish student fails to recognize the sociality of emotions and how their experience, indeed everyone's experience, is in itself produced through a series of police conflations that are ultimately false. In this case, a series of conflations that are ultimately false. Once the false conflations are accepted by the university administrators, then any criticism of Israel or harsh criticism of Israel in its right abusive policies can be cast as anti-Semitic. The point is that by accepting it, university leaders fall into a trap. Traditional anti-Semitism others Jews in order to assert their place at the bottom of the social hierarchy and impose a form of oppressive and often violent racial governance, and therefore should be fought against vigorously. But as I mentioned, the IHRA definition highlights Jewish difference, extended to the state, and produces an attachment between the individual Jew and the Jewish state, which asserts Jewish supremacy in Israel. Ultimately, the accusation of this kind of anti-Semitism is meant to shield the state's domination of Palestinians from moral condemnation and pro-Palestinian resistance. This move, this weaponization of anti-Semitism to shield the colonial project must be resisted. Unfortunately, what we have witnessed is that university leaders have, often without question or consultation, accepted the made-up anti-Semitic charge and have clamped down on pro-Palestinian speech, claiming that it creates an unsafe environment for students and staff, which provides in turn an excuse to cancel events and dismantle the encampments. The second key charge universities mobilized against encampments was that they created a hazard, producing an unsafe environment for university students and staff. This is similar to the claims against various Palestinian solidarity events that were carried out outside the university. With the encampments, however, universities have highlighted physical obstructions, such as access to restrooms, rocks used to anchor tents, the state of the grass, electricity used to charge cell phones, and elevated fire concerns. While some of the issues are simply framed as hazards by administrators, others may well be real risks. But even if the risks are real, they are precisely the kinds of risks that universities regularly encounter and regularly resolve in their daily operations. Indeed, an analysis of the hazards that administrators invoked as justification for dismantling the encampment suggests that safety and health regulations originally drafted to protect students and staff were mobilized by universities to stifle academic freedom, freedom of speech, and freedom of association, and thus violate the rights of their students and staff. At the Australian university, students were told at one point that the only electronic items allowed in the encampment were their telephone and laptops, suggesting that camping lights would be a breach of university's health and safety policy. At LSE, the London School of Economics, a university spokesman said that the dismantlement of the encampment occurred following, quote, careful consideration, including in relation to the safety of the protesters themselves. The spokesperson went on to note that fire safety was one of the reasons for applying a court order to dismantle the camp. And after dismantling the encampment at Oxford University, the university issued a statement that the encampment lawn was an important space for visitors to enjoy and relax in, and it wanted to remove any hazards from the area. Perhaps not surprisingly, one student accused the university of spending more time talking about the health of its grass than of 40,000 dead Palestinians. Anyone who was involved in the encampment witnessed how health and safety regulations were invoked to frame the encampment as a hazard, a security risk that need to be dealt with. There is, to be sure, an irony here. Regulations that were historically enshrined as fundamental rights in both international and local legislation to stop employees from getting hurt or ill at work and to fight institutional racism and sexism are being mobilized to clamp down on pro-Palestine speech and activism. Commitments that were introduced, at least partially, in response to the imperial and white supremacist character of the university, following decades of union and grassroots campaigning, are today being mobilized by the corporate university as tools of domination. The crucial point is that risks are not objective condition out there in the world, but are rather socially constituted and often come to be recognized as risks through speech acts. In this sense, it is not dissimilar from the anti-Semitism accusation that are based on the IHRA definition. Our conceptions of risk change over time and from one geographical location to another, and there are often vested political interests in casting something as a risk or in not casting it as a risk. Setting up tents on Oxford's grass can, of course, be framed as a risk to the university's daily activities, but the tents do not need to be framed as a risk. What I find fascinating about all of this is that while safety becomes the reason for silencing pro-Palestine speech and activism, the issue university managers really consider as the risk is not the encampments themselves, but what they stand for. Namely, vocal and thus non-docile students who demand to divest from companies that support the war machine and to boycott Israeli universities until Palestinians receive self-determination. One may legitimately ask whether universities, irrespective of the question of Palestine, should be investing in the military-industrial complex and corporations that facilitate killing. Now, this might not be relevant to universities in Holland, but it's definitely relevant to the pension funds of the staff working at universities. And while an academic boycott may appear to many as antithetical to academic freedom, the Association of University Professors in the US, the most important union organization in higher education in the United States, recently declared that academic boycotts can be a legitimate way to seek to protect and advance the academic freedom and fundamental rights of colleagues and students who are living and working under circumstances that violate that freedom and one or more of those rights. In such contexts, academic boycotts are not in themselves violation of academic freedom. Rather, they can be considered legitimate tactical responses to conditions that are fundamentally incompatible with the mission of higher education. We need to ask ourselves then, what is the threat that the university and indeed political leaders see before their eyes? Is it really the Palestinian flag or the electricity cord in the encampment? Or perhaps it is the student demand to divest and boycott. Or is it the fact that students are making demands, challenging the corporate model of the university? What we know is that in many universities, instead of engaging students and staff about the demands, administrators have been cynically manipulating safety regulations to frame an untold number of events and encampments as a security threat, constituting sites that aim to highlight the plight of Palestinians as a danger. Safety, in the guise of hazards and charges of anti-Semitism, is being manipulated and mobilized to quash conversation and debates about how universities, as institutions, should respond to genocide. Yet these conversations go right to the heart of the matter of what a university should be, how they should be governed, and what kinds of communities they should be cultivating, and indeed, the ethical stand they must take against genocide. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this, especially underscoring the corporatization of the universities and the implication of this on accountability. And I think it is very important also to highlight, as you did, the way that accusations of anti-Semitism has been used to thwart protests, conversations, but also seeming dialogue with the powers that be usually. I have 2 points of conversation. One that focuses on Palestinian universities, and the second one that looks at the Israeli universities. And allow me to frame this in the context of what you refer to in your book, Israel's Occupation, as the infrastructure of control. And in your book, I mean, Carmen Abulsi coined the term scholasticide. You wrote a lot about the Palestinian universities under attack, and of course, Maya Wynn's book, Towers of Ivory. Yeah, the microphone. Sure. In your laptop. Yeah, Towers of Ivory and Steel, which highlights the complicity of the Israeli universities. So I would like to look at this through the lens of Israeli infrastructure control, which you have described as basically being numerous administrative arrangements, legal orders, and policies that were constantly modified to conceal the permanent nature of Israel's control in the West Bank. And naturally, this affected the Palestinian universities, which were permitted to open in Israel in the 70s as part of a so-called liberal policy. But in that liberal policy, textbooks, employment, and lots of disruption on knowledge production took place that perhaps prevented Palestinian universities to be as active and as present in the global academic scene. And so my questions pertain to 2 things. One is, how do you conceive of policing language as part of that infrastructure of control, particularly with the use of the term genocide, which we are often confronted with requests that one does not use it. So that would be about this in more general, and in more pragmatic ways, how do you think us as academics, but also as institutions, we can support Palestinian universities to be more present and safer in the global conversation? So that's the first thing. I think maybe we start with that, and then I move to the second point. Is that okay?
The second part, what was the second question?
I haven't yet, oh, you mean the second, is like, how can we support Palestinian universities to be more safe and present in the global academic scene? And then the next point about Israeli universities I can make after the response.
I'm just concluding.
Sure, yeah, okay. So the second point, as I said, pertains more to the Israeli universities and the demographics. So a lot of the times, the effort of academics speaking against the occupation, whether on the level of grassroots movements or within the institutions, this effort is pushed against and flattened by claims of concern about the representation of Israeli critical voices. And it's often claimed by individuals on the right, on the center, and on the left of the political spectrum that boycotting and divesting is not fair towards these voices. My question is often critical of what? Is it critical of Netanyahu or is it critical of the occupation? They are separate questions, although of course they do intersect. So I would like to understand this better in the context of the polls that come out about the Israeli public opinion. And I'm basing this on the poll made by the Pew Research Center conducted in March and April 2024, where the polls show that 34% think that Israel has not gone far enough, 39% who think that it's been about right, 19% who say it's gone too far, don't know 7%, and refuse to answer 1%. In a different configuration, views of the military response are divided along ideological lines. Roughly half of those who place themselves on the right, 52%, say the military response has been insufficient. About a quarter of those in the center, 24%, agree, and only 9% of Israelis on the left say the same. On the other hand, a majority of Israelis on the ideological left, 55%, say the military response to Hamas has gone too far. Only 15% of those in the center and 5% of those on the right share this view. Among Israelis who have a favorable view of Netanyahu, roughly 49% say the response has been about right, but another 45% say it has not gone far enough. Only 1% of those who favor Netanyahu think the military response has gone too far. So my question is to take it to academia. How are these numbers reflected in the academic sector? For example, what is the most pronounced position of academics on the left, for example? And in relation to that, I'm curious about what kind of academic conversations take place in universities about colonialism, post-colonialism, and decolonization. That's it.
No, I think for time reasons, also because we want to have a Q&A, it's better if you first respond as well, and then you can take all the more points. Yeah.
Yeah, so helaas, well, I don't like this podium, I'm too short for it.
Can everybody see, hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. You know me for many years. You might not remember, but in 2015, I was spending a semester in Israel. And I was invited by the sociology and anthropology department at Aviv University, my alma mater, to debate Professor Dani Rabinovich, who was at the time leading a massive anti-BDS campaign. A former lesbian of a friend of ours who was really taking a sharp turn and turning into a crusader against BDS. When I was there and I accepted the invitation, it was at the time when Israeli media started really framing BDS as terrorism, as real threats, like threat from within and threat from outside. And so in this climate of total, exactly around the date of this event, there was really like daily television and whatever, and newspaper articles about the threat of BDS. So I was becoming a little bit nervous that I consulted with a few of my mentors. One of them is Neve. Neve, I don't know if you remember, you told me at the time, do it, but just know you're gonna burn all your bridges. Everything, you're gonna lose everything, all your connections. So that was a real, yeah, that was a real chill. And nevertheless, I decided to go, and I mean, no, it was total friendly advice, you know? Just consider it, you know, there will be consequences. And I decided to go for it, and this was a very intense and good event. I think I debunked Danny completely in front of his graduate students. And are you okay? If you're interested, my speech then was published in Mondoweiss, one of the leading progressive Jewish blogs. So it's still available. If you look for my name on Mondoweiss, you will hit it. Anyways, long story short, I think that at the time I did it because I had this conviction. And this conviction led me also to be co-founder of Academia for Equality, an organization today of 800 Israeli and Palestinian scholars and people who are working at the university and fighting for their rights, basically, and for freedom of expression and everything. So at the time, I had this conviction that supporting our critical voices in Israel is essential, solidarity with them is essential, that this is also a way, you know, the whole social justice issues that we were fighting for were also a way to give back to the society that made me the academic that I have become. So I think that from that moment onwards, this is almost 10 years ago, I can't believe it. I think that we struggle, and today Academia for Equality is led by Palestinian scholars at Israeli academia, and we are mostly focusing on helping people who are attacked on a daily basis and really supporting each other when people are attacked inside Israeli academia. And you know, Israeli universities they're not unique, they're just part of a landscape today of radicalization. Israeli society radicalized at large, and it is really moving closer to a mirror of the fascization of the entire society. The support for the war is overwhelming, the support for the soldier, the support for the reservists, also at the university, is at its highest point. The complicity with crimes of Israeli universities, which we have begun to investigate and follow back in 2015, is at its highest point. We also today compile lists and lists of academics who are appearing in the public space and calling for genocide. So literally there are voices of people from within Israeli academia who are supporting the genocide. So the question is not, to me, is the question of the critical voices. I'm just kind of following up on you, is really critical because to me it is not a fake thing that academia can be a place where critical voices are nurtured. I am a product of Israeli academia, the 1990s, the production of critical knowledge of Zionism. I would not be here if I was not educated in Israeli academia at the time that I was. So I think it's not a marginal question. However, I think that this is a unique, we have to keep the hope that education is a way forward. And I think here I link what Neve is saying. Our struggle is to protect the university as a democratic space. Our struggle is to to continue to produce critical knowledge about this society and about this, what is happening there. And I do think that for me, at least personally, I will not be able to be the academic that I am, the critical person that I am, the activist that I am here at this university, if I wasn't also very deeply engaged with how knowledge is produced there and what people are doing there and how Israeli society is studied there, if I wasn't able to understand, how, the sociology of knowledge production there. So for me, this is, however, this week, just to give you a small little anecdote, I was last year a member of the Israeli Sociological Association board. I wasn't a very productive member, and at the end of the year, I even kind of exploded the whole kind of nice and convivial meeting over the question of BDS. It shocked me to discover that my association, which is considered very progressive, has also turned and now is engaging in a campaign, and sort of anti-BDS campaign, in which they're going to send a letter to journals, and in the letter they're going to say that they are very concerned about desk rejections and all kinds of forms of informal boycotts that Israeli is experiencing. I mean, I can't tell you how devastating and disappointing this for me as an insider, right? As someone on the board of this association. This year I decided to resign, but I think that my presence there kind of flagging that this is a complete complicity with the Israeli government. How could you call yourself progressive and critical people if you are doing that? Was still important. Similarly, going to conferences, speaking in Israel, speaking to graduate students in Israel, I think is still, I see that still as kind of my, you can say, civic duty in a way. But I think maybe you can respond to that, our particular position and our particular struggles from within and from without. I, together with Yolanda, we wrote about the discourse around anti-Semitism. I don't want to spend too much about it. I think you captured it really well, all the conflations, all the lies, all the mobilizations around that. Still, I can just mention one event that I participated in this week with the Jewish community. And again, I think an insider position here is also really critical. It's critical that we engage with community, what it thinks, how it operates, how it frames anti-Semitism, that we are there to raise our critical voices also in that kind of, in sort of even in events that seem unprogressive on the face of it. And for instance, one of the sentiments that were mentioned there in the event is, we're Zionists. We're Zionists. We love Israel. We have family in Israel. We care about Israel. That is the level of their understanding of what Zionism is. And so, if this community defines itself as Zionist this way, again, on the level of emotion, attachment, care, concern for the faith of Israel, I think that, again, being there and hearing that, and also understanding that they feel attacked. If they say that they're Zionists, they are already feel that they have to kind of, take a shield and run away. Oh, I'm Zionist, don't kill me. That's how they feel. That's the position that they feel that they're in. I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying it's critical that we are there in these sort of environments, also in order to understand that economy of motion, understand the background to it, understand the sociology of it, and for us to be able to respond well and effectively and politically effectively about, around this issue of anti-Semitism. Thank you so much, Neve.
Thank you, Neve, for tonight's talk, and thank you again for your talk in Tilburg on Monday, which was so inspiring that several colleagues and several students contacted me or our student solidarity group because they wanted to participate in organizing. So hopefully it will happen here as well tonight. I'd like to pick up on what you said about the ways in which ideologically constructed emotions have been weaponized to silence speech and action against the genocide. And what you said reminded me of the open letter that Jewish faculty and students of this university published in Het Parool on May 11th, testifying to their feelings of unsafety because of the protest. Although the signatories of the letter claimed to speak from the heart, the letter was actually mostly copy-pasted from the open letter that Jewish faculty and students at Columbia University had published 3 days earlier. The Columbia letter has, we would like to speak in our name. The Dutch version aims om namens onszelf te spreken. To speak on their own behalf, students and colleagues at the University of Amsterdam paradoxically parroted discourse from an entirely different context. And what you said about ideologically constructed emotions also reminded me of the many conversations I've had with our rector and our other administrators in Tilburg, who have often sought to diffuse our concrete demands to get the university to speak out against genocide and to cut its ties with complicit Israeli universities and corporations by employing a discourse of emotional empathy, paternalistically showing an understanding how we must feel so upset about the quote-unquote conflict. And some Dutch universities have gone so far as to hire professional mediators to organize dialogue tables in which you're not supposed to discuss politics, but only share your feelings. Finally, many self-professed Dutch liberals or progressives, also in academia, have resorted to an ostentatious display of their feelings of paralysis because of Dutch participation and complicity in the Holocaust, sometimes presenting their inaction perversely in terms of a critical awareness of their positionality. As a Dutch person, as an Amsterdammer, or as someone whose best friend is Jewish, it's not my place to criticize the genocide. The emotional blackmail with supposed feelings of unsafety, the trivialization of political demands by psychologizing students and staff calling for an academic boycott, and redefining the responsibility of university leadership as diffusing polarization, and the white liberal profession of emotional conflictedness or paralysis, all reinforce the frame of repressive tolerance that our previous prime minister established immediately on October 7th. On that day, Mark Rutte stated on Dutch public television that, quote, "We've not seen very often that the conflict affects very ordinary people," thus reinforcing the racial contract that disavows not just that Palestinian lives matter, but that Palestinians exist. How then do we disrupt this regime of repressive tolerance that bolsters the Dutch government's military, financial, diplomatic, and ideological support for Israel while it is carrying out a genocide? The way to disrupt this regime, I would argue, is not by bracketing emotions, but by confronting them head on. Speaking truth to power at this moment in Dutch universities and in the Netherlands more broadly primarily means confronting emotions as they are shaped by power, emotions of identification or solidarity with the genocidal apartheid state, emotions of paralysis about the Holocaust, emotions of anti-Palestinian racism and Islamophobia, and emotions of fear. The important thing to do at this point, I think, is to stop agreeing to disagree with our liberal and liberal Zionist colleagues, students, friends, and family about settler colonialism, occupation, apartheid, persecution, and genocide. To stop respecting people's emotions that are shaped by murderous power, and instead take people seriously by engaging them in conversation and by getting them to share our outrage at the ongoing genocide on the Palestinian people.
Okay, so I'll try to be fast and answer these questions as fast as I can. And then, so we can open it up to discussion from you, because I would really like to hear people here as well. regarding the language of genocide, I think I want to make 2 or 3 points. One is that often, and I have to say, it's related even to emotions in a way. Even the paradigmatic example of genocide for me as a Jew, obviously, was the elimination of 6 million Jews here on European soil, and it has held up as the paradigmatic example of genocide. And once it is held up like that, there can be no other genocide in a sense. And yet, we know there have been many other genocides. There's been many genocides before the Holocaust, and there have been several after it. And I say no because today we have a legal definition that defines what genocide is. And according to that legal definition, I teach in a law school, I think that what is going on in Gaza meets the definition. There is, in my mind, no doubt about it. People tell me, why don't you wait till the ICJ reads its conclusions? And we know how the ICJ operates, and it can take it 5 years to reach its conclusion, and then it's too late. So we have to reach a decision on our own. I will only add that one of the first things I teach my students is I ask them, what is legal work? Legal work is legal interpretation. We interpret the law. That is what we do. And my interpretation is that Israel is violating the Genocide Convention. And I think we have to be precise about that. And I think we have to use that term because that term does have a very important moral balance to it, and as saying this should not be done, this is part of the never again, and yet the European countries that signed the never again and so forth are allowing it to continue. I will move to, maybe I'll come back to the question of how to support Palestinian universities in a minute, but I will move to the kind of demography of the Israeli academia, because I think that is a very important question, because the major claim, or one of the major claims against an academic boycott is that the Israeli academia is one of the major sites of resistance to what Israel's doing in Gaza and in the West Bank. And there is something to that claim, but I want to kind of shed light a bit about it and about part of the mistake. You know, Foucault once said that it's important to decide when history begins. Because when history begins is an important question. Did history begin in 1882 with the first immigration wave to Palestine? Did it begin in 1917 with the Balfour Declaration? Did it begin in 1948 with what the Palestinians called the Nakba and the Israelis called the War of Independence? Or did it begin in 1967 and so on? Now, there's in the Israeli and in the European perception of the Israeli academia, there is a good Israel and there is a bad Israel. The bad Israel is Netanyahu, okay? The good Israel is the ones that resist Netanyahu, the ones that resist the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. But the good Israel, for them, history begins in 1967. For the Palestinian on this panel and the Palestinians in this room, didn't begin in 67. Definitely didn't begin in 67. It began in 48, began in 1917, it began in 1882. That's when they want the history to be told. Now, the Israeli academics that Hila was mentioning that are part of the Academia for Equality, many of them are part of the good Israel. A few of them are willing to take the Palestinian refugee problem, the 1948 Nakba, seriously, and to talk about the return of the diaspora to Israel, to talk about this prior history. Very few Israeli academics, very, very few Israeli academics are willing to confront that. And that is the difference. So they'll come and say, hey, Israel's occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip is horrendous. They will say that, but they're not willing to go further back in history. And that is a very important distinction that needs to be made in terms of the demography. Moreover, I'll add one sentence on this because I think it's important to understand. For 35 weeks before October 7th, there were protests in Tel Aviv with hundreds of thousands of people against the judicial overhaul. Of those hundreds of thousands of people that came every Saturday for 35 weeks, I would say between 2,000 to 3,000 were willing to look at history before 48. Okay? And the rest were fighting, the vast majority of them were fighting for democracy for the Jews, not democracy for the Palestinians in the West Bank or Gaza Strip. And that's important and among them, the academics, the vast majority of them. I will, so that, I think that also relates to Hila's question about the positionality of Israeli universities. I'll add one more thing about the positionality of Israeli universities. So there's been, since October 7th, there's been a major crackdown on any resistance to the state project, any kind of criticism. I mean, Palestinian students were suspended and arrested in mass within the first 2 weeks, and they managed to cut down all social media of these students because anything you could post could lead you to the police station as a Palestinian. And you saw suspensions and arrests of scores of students immediately, and then the rest were frightened. We've seen the attack on Nadira Kevorkian, Shalom Kevorkian, and the bullying in the way that she was treated as a professor of Hebrew University. There's been 2 more Palestinian staff members that have been fired. There has been an Israeli Jewish staff member that has been fired. In my previous university, there were posters of 5 staff members that signed a petition asking Biden not to continue doing arms trade with Israel. There were posters throughout the university with their pictures on them saying this is what they did, and within the atmosphere in Israel, that's very dangerous for them. So that's the kind of crackdown post October 7th. And yes, we are right that Israeli universities, I think he is right, are not different from other universities in the world. Other universities in the world are all complicit with their own states and different research projects and different, but the question is then, what is the state doing? What is their state doing at that historical moment? And the Israeli state at this historical moment is carrying out genocide, and that makes the Israeli universities complicit with that. And so forth, and we can get into that a bit more. Regarding Michiel's question about addressing the emotions and disrupting the kind of manipulation of emotion, the creation and manipulation of emotions, I think he's absolutely correct, but I just want to say one thing about that. So when a student comes to my office and says, Neve, I feel like this, or Neve, I feel like that. And it may be, Neve, I feel like there's anti-Semitism here, whatever it may be about something. I cannot argue with their feelings. Their feeling is effecticity to them. Okay? It is there. That's how they feel. There's no argument. It's not, what I can do, and also very gently, within what academia has become, it has to be very gently, yet trying to discuss the sociality of their emotion, the sociality of their feeling. But if I tell them their feeling is wrong, I get in trouble. Okay? That's where we are in today. So we have to think of very carefully how to address these feelings, which they do feel. But these feelings are misplaced. And it's very important to understand how they're constructed, why they're constructed, and what is their goal. Okay? And it could be through going through some of the things that I said here about how the kind of falseness and fallacies that are created in order to help construct these kinds of feelings. But we're in this moment now that you cannot argue with a student's feeling, and the corporate managers want that. The corporate managers want that kind of thing, that feeling is everything. And so we have to be very careful about it, but I completely agree with you that we have to resist it. We have to challenge it, but we have to think strategically, and a lot of this struggle has to be strategic, Finally, I'll end with maybe the question of supporting Palestinian universities. So first of all, now is a different time. It's a time where Palestinian universities in Gaza exist, not as material institutions, but they put out a call in Al Jazeera saying, we exist not through our materiality. You've destroyed all our materiality. You've destroyed all our labs. You've destroyed our buildings. You've killed a lot of staff members. Okay, this is the situation today. But there's still a lot of students there, and there's still a lot of professors there, and they need our support. They need our support through online teaching. They need our support through funding to rebuild, once the genocide ends, to rebuild those universities. They need our support through training. They need our support through scholarships. They need our support, and our universities, compared to what's going on there, and our communities are rich, and we need to mobilize to support them. That is our responsibility to our own sector. So I think in that sense, and also we have to keep in mind that this is the new reality. It's not as if academic freedom for Palestinians existed before that. There's whole sectors that don't exist in the Gaza Strip, like basic things like physical therapy. Students had to travel to the West Bank to train in physical therapy, and the Israeli regime did not allow it. Okay, oncologists. So things you need for saving lives, and it's all related to the movement, even in the West Bank. If Michael wants to go and teach in Birzeit, or go and teach in An-Najah in Nablus, or in the university in Jenin, or anything like that, it's most likely he will not get a permit to go and teach there. He'll have to do it online. So academic freedom, and we need to think of ways of mobilizing in order to ensure academic freedom of the Palestinians. And I'm going to stop here to allow time.
I hope you can have a break till 9:30, because then we more or less have to leave. So we're just going to go on. I think it would be nice if people would also ask questions in the panel, so it's up to you. I can also give a comment, please don't make it too long. Who can I pass it? You already raised your hand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My name is Zora. Thank you very much for the talk. I have to say the first time that I hear you read the schedule in the other lecture, and I'm very much pleased with the position that you have taken and the stand that you have on how you see that it's very evidence.
Can you speak up though?
Yes, I will try.
Like the man here, I also have a problem hearing. Yeah.
As I said, I'm Israeli. I very much appreciate your work and courage that you demonstrate by being both Israeli and Jewish academic and the position you have taken. Now, I'm very much happy. I was happy to hear that you mentioned the iron definition and all the trouble that it has caused. I had the privilege to interview Kenneth Stern, one of the original drafters of the statement, after he posted the Guardian article said, right-wing, I helped write the iron definition, and right-wing Jews are weaponizing it. When I spoke to him, I asked him who exactly you were referring to, and he mentioned a few Jewish groups that operate within the United States, but I didn't really understand fully what he referred to. It was only after when I moved to the Netherlands here in Amsterdam and I joined one of the WhatsApp groups for the Jewish network of Amsterdam that I found the vast amount of events that give a variety of opportunities for the local Jewish community to engage with what can only be referred to as Hasbara agents sent by the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. With this in mind, I appreciate the call to speak truth to power. I think it is necessary. At the same time, being a bit more tactical, I understand that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Israel, the State of Israel, the government of Israel, is mobilizing vast amounts of people that are unsuspecting, thinking that fighting for the state of Israel means safeguarding Jewish minds. I was hoping whether you can address the idea of how important it is for us as Jewish Israelis or other Jewish academics that recognize what happened with Israel Segal or whatever I call they refer to the genocide and other ones, do engage with local communities abroad, local Jewish communities abroad, and abroad specifically. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I got a few remarks, questions.
Here, there's a few more hands.
Neve Gordon, thank you for the speech. I really like your analysis of how university boards respond and why they respond this way, and there's an excellent clinical here for student activity in particular. But I want to ask you about another dimension that I think is at play here, because by and large, my estimate of this sort of the university board members that I've spoken with this last year with this issue is that they would position themselves somewhere on a sort of liberal spectrum, right, while doing this quite authoritarian sort of policy. But there's also an intense pressure politically that's been mobilized, not just from supporters of Israel, but from the far right, very often in government. I mean, we recently had a government minister coming for a government dominated by the far right, who is a member of a Christian Zionist organization, right? So very ideologically profiled. We've seen it in the US, how central sort of the Republican mobilization through Congress and the pressure on Ivy League presidents has been. So whether we can analyze or whether you can sort of give your opinion on how this sort of neoliberal authoritarianism, how that relates to sort of the rise of the far right and their explicit support for Israel and their mobilization of that very specific argument on interference.
Thank you so much, Paul. I have only observations from the field, from students. I hear there's a difference between caring for Jewish students, not only in the Netherlands, but I mean around the world, and Palestinian students. Nobody cares about how they feel, because their feelings is relevant and it's not important. And another thing, which is, I find it, I mean, you as a leading person, maybe you have tips. Some students who have visa, who came from abroad, are studying in the Netherlands, they are now threatened by losing their visa. And unfortunately, some of them are Muslims. So we are talking about Islamophobia in this case. Is there any way you can, or anybody can help them? Because at this point they can be becoming, undocumented or losing even, they cannot even go back home. Thank you.
Should I take these?
Yeah, maybe and then after. You hope to talk for.
Yeah, I think it's an obligation to speak out, and I think that because I am and you are positioned as Jews, often or at times Jewish groups will be more willing to sit with us than with other with non-Jews. It's this kind of tribalism thing, right? And so I would definitely, I try to convince anyone. I believe in the discussion, conversations, debate, arguments, and so forth. And anyone that is willing to sit and talk to me, and particularly right-wing Jewish groups, then I'll do it. Unfortunately, my experience has been, particularly in the past few years, is that often many right-wing Jewish groups are unwilling to speak with me anymore. I've crossed a certain threshold. Some still are, but many in the UK, or in the UK, the UK Lawyers for Israel or the Board of Deputies have tried to talk, sent emails to have conversations, and they were uninterested. So, but I will not stop trying, and I think it is our obligation to try to move them, to use our privilege in a way that will reflect on it and use it for something that we believe in. Regarding the political pressures, yeah, they're alive and well, and they're alive and well here in Holland, from what I understand. And I think it is our role to understand this, to understand that the university leaders now are in a certain constellation, that they are dependent on public funding that the governments decide on the one hand, and that are putting pressure on them both to stop any kind of critical thinking and so forth. The universities, according to these right-wing governments, are considered kind of the hotspots of resistance towards them. And so we have to understand, even as we participate in protests and encampments, that that is their situation. At the same time, we have to continue making our demands for them. And we have to understand that they are strategizing within this kind, and it's kind of obvious to me that if they have an encampment pressure on one side, and a government pressure, and a municipality pressure, and a corporate pressure on the other side, which side they're going to choose to kind of ultimately represent. Now, we have to work within that, not to let them off the hook. We have to see if they are creative. They can be creative, and often they choose not to be, or they're creative in a totally different way, like Shafiq was when she called the police against the Columbia University, or like the president of your university here. But if we demand boycott and they go part of the way, I think we need to respect that. We need to understand that there is a certain constellation now. We need to continue our fight, but at the same time respect. So we have to stand on our principle, continue our fight. The other side will do what they do, but we have to also realize what their positionality within this current constellation. It's important. We're not in a kind of void. We are in a web of power relations, and we have to understand that web of power relations and try to work with it strategically to get as much as we can. And we have to see what force we have. If the encampment here is 200 students, that's a certain force. And if the encampment here is 3,000 students, we can make bigger demands. We have to see what we are. We can't just go as if we're 3,000 when we're 50. Okay? So we have to be very strategic about how we do these kinds of things. And regarding the comment about the kind of racism that appears in universities' emails about, let's say, following October 7th, I think it was a Western phenomenon that I talked to many colleagues in many universities. The emails that came from managers identified the Jewish students and staff as suffering, and it often said not a single word about the Palestinian students. And in my university, we immediately reacted back and we said, what is going on here? What is this discrimination? And the emails began to be a bit better, not, So we need, every little thing becomes a site of struggle. It's crazy. Every little thing, every email, but we have to be vigilant and to expose their racism, saying this email was racist. And it's quite amazing to me that, like you said here, I've given this talk in many places, and everywhere they'll say it. It's the same experience. Our institutions are still inflected with racism. And then they use the equality and diversity regulations that we fought for against this racism to continue with the racism. You're not respectful. That's what they're using. They're using our tools, the tools we developed in the universities, against us now. As they continue, it's mind-boggling sometimes.
Thank you. I have two questions. One, I was wondering about the 40% of the diaspora Jews that do not yes.
Speak to them.
Yes. So I was wondering about the 40% of diaspora Jews that you, I think, optimistically assume or.
No, it's a poll from Pew.
Yeah, so I think there's room to question that. It's very general. I mean, globally, I think it doesn't represent the Netherlands or the US. It would be very.
It's from the US. It's a poll carried out in the US.
Yes, so US diaspora Jews.
But that's where most of
them are. Yes, but I think still there is, I think, I like being optimistic, but sadly, I think we are in a different situation. And I think what can attest to it is the fact that you also, when you discuss having a dialogue with Jewish communities, rather than speaking about the mainstream Jewish communities, you say the right way, because even mainstream so-called Jewish organizations might not really be interested in dialogue with us because there's strong sentiments to Israel. So I think, unfortunately, I would like to think that it's representative, but My main question is another one, and that is, I really appreciate your analysis of how the corporate universities respond in this particular moment to the student protests. And I wonder if you can say something about how that conflates with the general anti-intellectual and anti-academic climate, because I think that plays in.
Thank you very much. Thank you for putting this event together. Thank you, Professor Gordon, for your speech. I just wanted to have one question about strategy and the tactics, and the one that was asking about creating cross-cutting alliances. So you said in campus 200, how can you reach 3,000? But they're not just academics, also students. So do you see steps within UK academia or other places where you create those cross-cutting alliances that go beyond just academia?
Thank you for a very inspiring presentation. Responses. Since we have you and other legal experts here, I wanted to ask also about strategy and tactics. One thing you mentioned was the importance of the pension funds as a target. Specific, if you could elaborate on that, whether we should maybe be focusing more of our energy in that direction. That's one question I had. And the other is the more general kind of legal question is, we just had this news that it came out, I think there were rumors already for a long time that Lincoln and Biden had basically covered up evidence that had made that it was basically that the U.S. was a violation of its own law by sponsoring Israel, right? Because Israel had been shown to be preventing the delivery of humanitarian aid, which is it's a violation of U.S. law to then continue to ship them weapons, as I understand it. And I was wondering more generally for the legal experts, what kind of legal tactics, what kind of European law, perhaps American law, UK law, should we be maybe focusing on and thinking more about in terms of applying pressure along these lines? Thank you.
Should I answer?
Maybe answer now, I'm not sure if we still have time then afterwards, yeah.
Okay, maybe I'll start with the pension funds. I think the pension funds is where we need to, staff, not students, that's where we need to concentrate. Your pension funds here are it's probably the biggest pension fund in Europe. That pension fund, that's where it hurts. That's where it hurts. And so if you can mobilize the people that pay into that fund, that ask the board of the fund to divest, then, and I think that's what we need to do, definitely regarding Israel-Palestine, but also the global environmental crisis, and also all weapon companies. Why should my pension be invested in weapons? Why should my pension be invested in destroying this economy? And I think that is where staff members need to mobilize, and I think we can do that. And I think staff, there have been in every place members and unions that are doing that, but we need to lend them our voice. I'll get back to the law in a minute, and maybe Michiel will also say a few things about the law. Jewish community, I think what the polls are showing, which is hopeful, is that there's now a gap between the older generation and the younger generation. The younger generation does not support and does not, many of them, as a group, it's not that less people in the younger generation support Israel than in the older generation of diaspora Jews. And that is very hopeful, and particularly in the United States, the largest growing Jewish organization in the United States is JVP, and it's always welcome. And I think that's a very hopeful moment, but these things, again, they take time. Yeah, the corporate university is a university that in many ways, again, the rationality becomes a kind of corporate neoliberal rationality. And we are judged by what we produce, and the students are expected to be docile consumers that can complain against us, but not against the university, okay? And once they become non-docile students, like the students in the encampments, they become the enemy. And they need to be shut down and clamped down very harshly, that the 200 people camp or the 50 people camp doesn't become a 3,000 people camp. And the other students watched the violence that was deployed against the students at the University of Amsterdam, and many people are afraid of violence. And it worked. Violence works. And from within that, those that spearheaded have to continue. They must continue, and they must create these kind of alliances with other student groups, with other groups. And the beauty, one of the beautiful things that Palestinians have managed to do is globalize their struggle. So when George Floyd was murdered in Minnesota, Palestinians in Gaza chanted Black Lives Matter. And then when the Black Lives Matter movement erupted in the United States, in many places, they chanted Palestine. And this is a connection, because they see that although they are repressed here and they are repressed here, there is a structure of domination that is racist. And they see these connections, and if they don't see them, we have to expose these connections and draw the connection between the major struggles and the struggle for Palestine. And that will, to go to the environmental groups at the university, to go to the groups that are against the genocide in Myanmar, to go to the groups to other student groups and say, listen, we've been attacked in the most violent way, and it's an act of solidarity this time to come and join us as students. You need to show your solidarity to what they have done to us here in this university. Because if they can unleash the police and the bulldozers against the students in Amsterdam today, and we do not step back up and say, no, I'm not saying we need to be violent, but we need to occupy, we need to, then they'll do whatever they want to in the future. And so other students, but it needs to be slow, it needs to be done, again, strategically, so you don't get hurt. So more students are there. So instead of a few hundred that are being attacked, you'll be in the thousands. And prepare the media and prepare the, be very professional about it. It's hard, but that's, I think, what we need to do. So yes, and I'll end with the law, and then maybe, in the Memorandum of Arms Trade of the US government, it says that the US government cannot trade arms to a country that violates international humanitarian law. It is very clear and beyond doubt that Israel is violating international humanitarian law. So what do? They bring in the lawyers. They bring in the lawyers. The lawyers justify to Biden and Blinken that this is kosher. Okay, because what is legal work? Legal work is interpretive work. They do their acrobatics, they do their jiu-jitsu, and they interpret it as if it's okay. Okay, and what we need to do is to expose those lawyers. And it's difficult work, and it's, again, it's not only Israel, Palestine, They did it in Sri Lanka when the Sri Lankan government went against the Tamil. They do it everywhere. But why? We have to understand what is going on here. Why? Because they want to sell weapons. They want to make money. They make money from death. So they interpret the law in a way that allows them to make money from death. And you sit with them and they provide some of the arguments, like, you know, my claim, maybe I'll end with this, my claim is that the international humanitarian law as we know it today, which is the 1949 Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols from 1977, these are the laws of war that were formulated following World War II as a way to regulate war, not to stop war, to regulate the violence in war so that there will be never again, right? My claim is that this very legal apparatus is being used by Israel and by people in the lawyers in the United States to allow genocide. So the very legal framework that was created to ensure that there won't be genocide again is being used to legitimize genocide, and that will lead ultimately to the dismantlement of the international legal order if we allow it to go through. That's what's going on, and that in front of our own eyes. And the way they do it, or one of the ways they're doing it, is by rendering the whole Gaza Strip as a human shield. The hospitals are shields, the schools are shields, the mosques are shield, your apartment building is a shield, your child is a shield, your father and mother are shields. Everyone is a shield because there's tunnels under the Gaza Strip. And so everyone that we kill above the tunnels and all the rubble that we create above the tunnels is legit. And if that argument passes, we're done. And we cannot let that argument pass. Hallelujah.